Very good. So, the topic of today's webinars is how Gen AI audio companies can comply with AI transparency law and avoid millions of dollars or euros in fines, even if you have no knowledge of AI legislation. It's a unique solution that allows you to comply with AI transparency legislation across the world. If you're on this webinar, it's because you have a limited knowledge of AI transparency law. It's difficult to keep pace with AI regulations, so you need some assistance, as we all do. No idea on how to comply with the regulations, and want to find a quick solution so you can focus on your core activity, namely building a great Gen AI audio company. Today you'll learn what the law asks you to do to comply, technical solutions to comply, how to streamline AI transparency compliance, and when AI transparency law will be enforced without having to get a law degree, without going mad, and finally, without wasting a ton of moolah. We are Transparent Audio, me and Valerio, and what we do as a business is transparency compliance for Gen AI audio companies. We are two founders with between us over 15 years of experience in the AI audio world. Previously, I founded two other companies and took them to profitability in the music tech sector. I built a social network for AI with AI features for over 2 million Audacity users and have a deep connection to the open source community. Whereas Valerio, our CTO, is a bit of a legend in the AI audio sphere. He has founded and sold his own generative music company, currently professor of Gen AI music at the highly respected music technology group in Barcelona, and also leads one of the largest online audio AI ecosystems for developers. So between us, we like to think we know what we're talking about. We specifically advise the European Artificial Intelligence Office on transparency and the technology required to maintain transparency. This is, like I mentioned, technical guidelines for how to enforce legislation and the regulation. And our specific sector is AI regulation for the creative industries, AI audio, music, voice cloning, and so forth. We also give them advice about copyright and attribution. Some of our current customers are ones like Kits AI that do voice cloning and cloning for singers and musical applications there. BeatOven.ai, one of the larger prompt background or sync music companies, also the same as Mosaic, who works specifically with Canva, providing Gen AI music via prompt for videos or creative applications. Sample Sound that do generative AI samples for music makers, Deep Noise, who are pioneering a AI synthesizer, and loads of other ones besides. This particular webinar is for people involved with Gen AI music, i.e. prompt music or other types of AI audio music generation, voice cloning, cloning a voice of some kind and using it in another way, text-to-speech, such as turning a document into a podcast, sound generation, such as Gen AI audio to create Foley for a video, for instance, and basically non-audio companies that use Gen AI audios, ones that perhaps combine video with audio or text and audio and so forth. Who is it not for? It is not for companies that do not use Gen AI audio in general. Audio analysis, for example, this is not the specific use case. And of course, unethical Gen AI audio companies, companies that do not care about complying or IP rights otherwise. The plan for today is to, one, understand AI transparency regulation. Two, take a look at 7 of the big mistakes to avoid for AI transparency compliance. And finally, number 3, how to comply with AI transparency regulation in general. Now, in today's day and age, it is incredibly difficult to differentiate between AI generated voice and music and human voice and music. In fact, it is a societal problem. The public mistakes an AI generated voice for a human voice 80% of the time, not to mention music. This is possibly even harder. This results in various societal problems such as deepfakes coming for your bank balance, deepfakes of political figures hijacking our democratic process, and ultimately meaning that we are in a society which is overwhelmed by audio content. It's going to be incredibly difficult for your average person to know what's true, i.e., what's possibly from a human, what's been verified as fact, and what is fake or coming from another source. Now, the solution that's being proposed by the majority of regulators in the world is to label audio content as AI generated. AI, i.e., audio that comes from an AI model needs to be labeled as such. Now, the biggest piece of legislation in the world right now, specifically not just Gen AI, by AI in general, is the EU Artificial Intelligence Act. Now, this is a very large piece of legislation covering everything from LLMs to AI avatars and everything else, right? We're not going to go super deep into the whole act at the moment, but what we are going to discuss is what it says about transparency and specifically transparent audio. Now, the most interesting part about output transparency, or the most specific part, is Article 50, and even deeper than that, Section 2. Now, what Section 2 of Article 50 says is that providers of AI systems, including general purpose AI systems generating synthetic audio, and of course, image, video, or text content as well, shall ensure that the outputs of the AI system are marked in a machine readable format and detectable as artificially generated or manipulated. I.e., a machine needs to be able to read where your audio content or audio content came from and mark it as artificially generated. Now, who does Article 50 section apply to? This applies to absolutely all generative AI audio companies, regardless of what type of content they make or how they got there, that serve customers in the EU. This, of course, is music, but like I mentioned before, voice agents, any type of audio, even if it's background music, is the AI audio. Article 50 doesn't differentiate. Now, companies all over the world who want to operate in the European market will have to be aware of this transparency regulation. And so, in between the EU AI Act, we've got loads of AI lawyers eyeing up the next piece, or the second biggest piece of legislation in the world, which is the California AI Transparency Act. Now, the California AI Transparency Act, specific to California, surprise, surprise, says something similar to the EU AI Act. Namely, that the bill would require a covered provider, in this case, a generative AI audio company, to include a latent disclosure in AI generated image, video, and of course, audio content that is any combination thereof, including companies that combine both, for example, created by the cover provider's Gen AI system that, among other things, conveys certain information regarding the provenance of the content, i.e., right, where did it come from, who made it, what is the path that it got to in terms of being a generated piece of AI audio content. So quite similar to the EU AI Act, but also in the same vein. Now, that is the California specific piece of legislation, but there are other actors, other politicians pushing for federal legislation across the United States. In particular, the No Fakes Act has been proposed by certain U.S. senators, and it's still obviously in process, but the developments are similar to what we've seen before, right? In Europe, again, and in fact, actually internationally, the Council of Europe Convention on AI also has a section to do with AI transparency. Namely, each party shall adopt or maintain measures to ensure the adequate transparency, including with regard to the identification of content generated by artificial intelligence systems. Once again, provenance, where does something come from, and requiring it to be labeled as such. Surprise, surprise, we're seeing a very obvious theme arise here, right? The Council of Europe, even though it's Council of Europe, is also includes those of other territories such as United Kingdom, Canada, Japan, and the United States of America. It's all the regulation around output transparency is moving in a certain direction. It's popping up all over the world. So this is a great time to be on this webinar and to be a little clued up about the topic in general. It is, of course, damn complex, right? There's different rules for different countries. In the US, currently as it sits, each state for itself, but that could change in time there because the legislation is ever evolving. So it's it can be difficult to wrap your head in sometimes, but the key is to stay updated. Now, they all have one piece of common ground, as we mentioned before. That is a machine readable marking. The regulation itself is enforced differently in different territories, but the biggest piece of legislation, as I mentioned before, the EU AI Act, will be enforced by August 2nd, 2026. This parts of the EU AI Act are enforced as of right now, but this specific part, the transparency requirements for output, will be enforced by individual territories on August 2nd, 2026 at the latest. The California AI Transparency Act is a little earlier, January 1st, 2026, and these other pieces of legislation are still in flux. But the trend is generally we're looking at enforcement in a couple of between 9 months and a year from now. So that was part one. We took a look at what some of the pieces of regulation in the world right now are and what they say specifically about output transparency. Now, part two is about the 7 big mistakes to avoid for AI transparency compliance. You want to avoid these mistakes so you don't put you or your business at risk. Now, mistake number one is to ignore AI transparency regulation overall in general. I'm sure it's very tempting. However, the cost is potentially devastating. So, in the EU, if you break these regulations in August 2026, you will pay either 15 million or 7% of your total worldwide revenue. Whatever is higher, in fact, right? So it can be very expensive if you don't do this. If you don't keep up to date about how the legislations change, then again, you're potentially exposing your business. The requirements around the machine readable format can change depending on territories, not to mention how the legislation evolves. It might be tempting to build an in-house solution, right? However, it's quite complex to build. It will take some of your, loads of your time or members of your team time, not to mention the potential cost to the business itself. And you have to, of course, have that talent and expertise in-house. It's expensive to hire, not to mention you have to find it. And possibly the most difficult part is the major deviation from your core business. Uh, AI audio companies in quite a competitive field really want to focus on their serving their core customers and not being distracted by this type of legislation. If you buy a solution that's not focused on compliance, you can run the risk of still being fined. There's many companies out there that are running Google ads already on the EU AI Act and say that they can tick all the boxes for the whole act, which simply is not the case. So a watermarking solution, for example, won't be enough, according to Transparent Audio, to be machine readable and robust, prevent manipulation, and so on. If you buy a solution from a company with no ties to the regulator, you are left with the question of, are we really complying with the regulation, right? Because this regulation is in flux, and companies like Vanta, for example, don't have a specific audio connection to the regulator. The solution that they might be selling possibly won't cover your company. And finally, you run a mistake not to make. Mistake number 6 is to buy a solution not focused on audio, i.e., a jack of all trades, master of none. Loads of companies try and do the whole remit of AI legislation and compliance. However, audio is specific, videos is specific, LLMs are specific, and this changes depending on the medium. And finally, the last mistake, number 7, is to wait until the last moment to comply. You might have to retroactively mark all of your content, and it's possible it's already in the wild before it's out there, and you can't retroactively mark it. Not to mention there's an onboarding time and so forth. So I would highly recommend avoiding mistake number 7, waiting till the last moment to comply. So, to summarize that, you don't want to ignore the AI transparency regulation in general unless you're an ethical AI company who likes fines. If you don't keep up to date, things could change. Building an in-house solution is expensive and takes your time. And the other solutions that are not focused on compliance, buying from a company with no ties to the regulator and buying a solution not focused on audio, it puts you at risk, right? So we would suggest don't wait till the last moment to comply and get ahead of the stuff and make sure that your company is in the clear. So that was part 2, the 7 big mistakes to avoid. And part number 3 is to how to actually comply with AI transparency regulation. We've heard about the regulation that exists and the 7 mistakes to avoid. So part 3 is how to actually do it, right? So we at Transparent Audio have a suggestion, namely use an API that labels audio as AI generated. In this model, you take in this specific example, a text-to-speech model, which generates a piece of audio, gets sent to a labeling API, which then embeds a compliance-specific content marking into the audio file. When this audio file goes to a user who uploads it to perhaps a social media platform, a DSP such as Spotify or Apple Music or other place, this third party can then prompt the identifier API, which will give the information about the audio file itself, right? So what model was used, what was the company, what was the time, etc. All types of information can be involved in this content marking solution that we've developed. So you have the chance to perhaps put attribution or royalties or other types of information in an AI generated audio file. Now, I'm going to go a bit more into what that content marking is specifically. So, the EU AI Act has some specific requirements on how you mark your content. It must be robust, it must be machine readable, and it must also be resistant to manipulation. And in general, the EU is the most stringent piece regulator worldwide. So when they say something, the rest of the world will. If you're compliant with the EU, you're compliant worldwide, more or less. Now, the technical guidelines are a work in progress, right? As I mentioned before, this stuff is ever changing. Hence why the regulation does not become enforceable until August 2026. So that's because these technical guidelines are a work in progress. But Transparent Audio is an advisor to the EU AI office, and we have some real thoughts about how this should be done effectively. Uh, so, of course, I'll share the insider info we have by advising the EU AI office. So, anybody on this webinar will get a sneak preview about the most cutting edge thoughts around this specific topic in the EU AI office. So, to be compliant, the marking should be, as I mentioned, effective, robust, and reliable. Um, the candidate solutions so far are, firstly, encrypted metadata. Metadata is a technology that has been around for a very long time. It gives information about a file, right? You can put any piece of text into a metadata and it can tell you. It's been used by all kinds of applications. In this particular case, in the candidate solution, it is encrypted. So if the seal, the metaphorical seal, is broken, a third party can see that this perhaps has been manipulated or not. The second candidate solution is watermarking, which again is in audio. There's all different ways of doing this. Some that affect the audio quality, some that don't. It's generally embedded into the audio signal itself. But this is part of the solution that the EU is suggesting. And finally, a third and most cutting edge solution, as I'm sure many of you who are in the AI sphere have seen, AI classification. So the way that this works is that a second AI model is trained on the same data as a generative AI model, and by identifying markers such as compounded compression and other artifacts, it can give you the answer of, is, for example, an audio file from Suno, the audio file from Suno, or a audio file from Udio, perhaps. So it can give you a super binary answer, or yes or no, about where an audio file came from without the first two pieces of data. Now, the key principle of these technical solutions are redundancy, redundancy, redundancy. So if one breaks, then you have the others to back it up, right? So this really covers the idea of robustness and protection against manipulation. The principle comes from the Swiss cheese principle of cybersecurity, right? I think this image speaks for itself. If you get through one slice of cheese, you might hit the wall on the next one. If you get through the second slice of cheese, you might run into a problem in the third one, right? Maximizing the chances that any bad actor, people who want to use a Gen AI audio piece of software for something malicious, are prevented from doing so. Now, that is the so-called multi-layer compliance solution. So at Transparent Audio, our idea is to use, and in line with what we're advising the regulator to do, is to use all three, right? Encrypted metadata, watermarking, and AI classification, resulting in bulletproof AI transparency compliance worldwide. So, to summarize, this is what we've covered so far. We have covered AI transparency regulation. We have covered AI transparency compliance mistakes. And number three, a compliance solution to avoid all of those. And this is essentially the product we're developing, leveraging our 30 plus years in AI audio in connections with the policymakers. That's Transparent Audio, our company. And we just wanted to say that AI transparency compliance can be surprisingly easy. You can't afford to fail AI transparency compliance. Remember the $15 million fines or 15 million euros. Either way, it's going to get expensive. And what we as a business have is what we consider a Godfather offer. Namely, we have an offer you can't refuse. Valerio is Italian, so we had to go with this metaphor. So, our Godfather offer at Transparent Audio is to offer customers, Gen AI audio companies, the marking API or SDK, whatever is better for someone's technical stack, an AI transparency certificate, which will say that the output of this specific model is transparent and compliant, custom compliance advice. As the regulatory framework is changing all the time, we'll be sure to keep people updated. AI transparency law updates. We have a legal team in-house that provides updates on these type of topics and sends them out regularly. All for free until the AI law is enforced. So a really unique opportunity to save an AI audio company loads of headaches, loads of red tape, and um, generally making life easy so they can focus on their core activity, which is building a great product for free until the law is enforced. And we have quite a few companies who have already signed on to our services. As I mentioned before, Kits AI, Beat Oven, Make It IT, which works specifically with audio to TikTok, Star Child, generative music, turning out remixes from existing pieces of content, creating new content. And this list is growing all the time. If you're interested, I'm going to post a survey in the chat so that if it feels like a good fit, we can suggest a follow-up strategy call. And on this call, we will provide you with custom advice specific to your case. And that leaves me to the end of the webinar. I hope you all enjoyed it, and it would be great to hear some questions from people if people have them. Valerio, are you there in the chat somewhere?
Yes, I'm in the chat. I think like obviously like the live is running a minute like late, something like that, and I think like it's a good moment to ask people to share their questions in the chat itself. So I know that Jeff has a few questions. So if he wants to start like sharing some of that, like that would be great, and we'll try to answer those. Yep.
It will be recorded, Jeff, but perhaps we can edit this part out if you would like.
Yeah, so I think like a solution, first question from Jeff is, are there any watermarking solution you'd recommend? So I can take like that question. And yes, there are like a few watermarking solutions, like open source ones, like that like people have tried out. Like, and they also come, I believe, like from Meta. Like Meta, like worked on some of this like lately. But the thing is, like that we are like a transparent audio, like we are building like our own like watermarking solution. And so basically, and obviously, like we would highly suggest you like to stick like with our watermarking solution that's going to be like at state of the art, and at the same time obviously it will be like within the framework like of AI transparency compliance, something like that's unique to what we are doing. And yes, there are other companies also that are doing like watermarking, but not with this particular spin. And I see Jeff also asking another couple of questions. So does content watermarking
Or do you want
survive?
to turn on your video?
Was that sorry?
Can you turn on your video?
Yes. Here we go. think yes. So now you can see me. Good. So there is another question from Jeff. So does content watermarking survive post-production editing, jump cuts, etc.? Well, it really depends on the type of watermarking, right, that you have there, and it really depends also on the type of post-production that you do on the watermarking itself. Yes, so traditionally watermarking has always like suffered like manipulations, so yeah, that can be a little bit of a problem. But there are also like different ways of like handling watermarking. Some of this like is you watermark only like one part of the entire like piece of audio, for example. And then if there are like jump cuts or things like that, then you're going to lose that information, right? And if there are like edits, cuts, but there are like other ways that are a little bit more redundant, where the watermark is inserted every like few seconds or few frames even, right? And so it really depends. But as always, like in engineering, there's always a trade-off. And the thing means that the more you try to have redundancy within a file, and obviously at the same time, the more perceptible the watermark is going to be. So that you should always strive to sort of like a balance there, for sure. Let's see another question again, like from Jeff, who has a lot of questions, and that's really really good.
Excellent.
ID3 tagging for AI generated content. And yes, so at the level of metadata, especially with MP3s, yeah, we're talking about yes, ID3 tagging. So using like that type of metadata, and there are other types of like metadata that you can use also in um, WAV files, and it really really depends on the type of file. But yes, ID3 version 2 is basically what we are trying to do, and what we're trying to do to use in order to actually have like a metadata tagged with all the necessary information for being compliant with the legislation. It's cool. And again, Jeff asking, so you'd recommend watermarking at the end of the content production chain? Yes, absolutely. So that should be the final thing. And transparent audio works that way, right? So basically what we do, so our companies are going to be generating these synthetic AI generated audio files, and those can be, again, it can be music, it can be voice, it can be any type of sound really. And then at the end of that pipeline, we come in and we actually apply metadata as well as like watermarking. But yeah, so that should be done at the end of the process, never like in between. Yeah, it's basically like post production. Cool. Okay, so are there any other questions? I Yeah, I guess like we should wait like a minute or so to give like people the opportunity to write, because obviously like we're running ahead of them because the live has a delay. But yeah, and last question from Jeff. Any insight into how we can detect AI audio content if it is not watermarked? I'm assuming that would be your model that is trained on specific audio output, for example, Suno Music. Yeah, that's absolutely correct. So if you don't have any information about metadata, if you don't have a watermark within an audio file, then what remains, the only opportunity that you have there to identify AI generated audio is to use a classifier, a deep learning model. And you would train that classifier. Say, for example, you want to identify Suno generated music or audio generated music. So what you would do is you would have like that classifier trained on a lot of Suno and audio generated music, and at the same time, music that hasn't been generated by those two generative systems. And so what you would then have is a classifier that can give you a bunch of different answers. So answer number one would be, okay, so I'm going to pass like this audio file, this song, and then it could tell you, yeah, it's been generated by Sune, or it's been generated by Udia, or it's just like a human-made piece of music. And but yeah, the key there is to have to basically have a classifier and to train it with AI generated music. But there's a but here, and the but is that these systems, these the classifiers tend to work quite well. They're very accurate, more than 98, 99%. But at the same time, they work only on the data that they've seen. So, for example, if you had another, say, like a Beethoven or Music, so it's another like generative music company, one of our clients, right? And you would try to ask a model that has never seen that type of music generated, say, like by music, whether that music has been generated by an AI or by a human, the model will never be able to tell you that. So the model only works on the data that it has seen in the training set. That is also true if like the version of the same model is different. So say, for example, Suna version 1 and Suna version 2. If you don't have like data for Suna version 2 and you've only trained on Suna version 1, so it's going to be very, very tough like, for the model to recognize Suna version 2 music as generated by Suna. So the moment you move away from the training set distribution, it's no longer going to work. So it's a continuous process of like keeping up to date like with all the new models that you deploy. And this is basically what we're going to do like with transparent audio. We're basically going to take care of all of that process for the companies that we serve. Cool. Oh, Jeff, yeah, that's a pleasure. Yeah, thank you for thanking us. Cool. And I see Pierre. So he says like delivery to DSPs could happen via DDEX format. Is DDEX supporting the encrypted metadata? This is something like that we haven't looked into yet, but it is something like that it's sort of like on one of the things that we want to look into. But we mainly work like at this point like with voice. We're mainly focusing on voice. So yeah, DSP is something like that we have like in the pipeline, but we haven't looked at that yet. So I don't have like an answer like for that yet because we haven't studied like that specific use case. But feel free like, to write us like in private, and we can like pick up like that conversation later. And we have Alexander asking, what do you hear from companies who, under the AI Act, are supposed to implement this? What is the current level of awareness and desire to work towards compliance? So, Lucas, would you like to answer that?
In general, all of the majority of the companies that we've spoken to are really interested in AI transparency, right? That the majority of them have heard of the idea of output transparency, but might not know the specifics of the EU AI Act nor the timeline. So, in general, the attitude of a lot of companies is really good, especially companies in the ethical AI field. But everybody will be forced to comply. So in fact, it's been really well received, which I think is good for everybody in the music industry, in the audio industry, in voice, and in democracy in general, because the attitude really has been good for us. But it's hard for people to understand how to do it, right? What is the regulation going to look like? What happens if it changes? What are the specific technical requirements that we've gone through? But we're feeling optimistic about the future.
It's cool. Yes. So we'll give one extra minute, like to people if they have some final questions. Otherwise, like we'll call it a day. And in any case, we are recording this session and we're gonna send it to your email. And please do remember like that if you want to like know more like about what we do and have also like some like custom advice like for like your specific company, remember to fill out the survey like that we shared in the chat already. And actually, I'm gonna share it like one last time in the chat so that you have it. Okay, yeah, just shared it there. And so yeah, if you guys like want to know more about this, have any more questions, want to like discuss like your specific use case, or just like want to know more about like what we offer, the Godfather offer, and want to work with us, by all means, like please do fill up like that survey, and we'll if there's a good fit, we'll move on and have a chat at that point. That's cool.
Okay, that might be the end, huh?
Yeah, I think so. And
All
there
right.
are no more questions. So I think like we can call it. Like we've been quite efficient with our time. This was the first iteration of this webinar. So yeah, thank you very much for coming.
Thank you, everybody, for coming. As Valerio mentioned, we're happy to speak to anyone who's interested, so it would be great to follow up. Thank you very much.
Take care.